Welcome back to Reimagine 2020. I'm Yonah Hochhauser, and today I'm glad to be joined by Dominik Schiener, co-founder of the IOTA Foundation. Dominik, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Yonah. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's always a pleasure to speak to the leaders of this new revolutionary technology like yourself who are pushing the envelope. So for those who don't know who you are, you want to give a little background about who you are and how you got into distributed ledger technology?
Yeah, for sure. So originally, I'm from the beautiful mountains of northern Italy, where there's a bunch of chaos and not much real activity, online activity happening. But I've been involved in the blockchain space since around 2011 because I stumbled upon it on an online forum where people were saying, hey, I want to be paid in Bitcoin. So that's how I got involved. And I really got involved in 2012. So I've been full-time in DLT since then. Initially, I kind of had my very entrepreneurial aspirations where I came up with this genius idea of trying to do my own crypto exchange. So that was early 2012, 2013. So I raised some capital for that. I made my own money also with mining here and there, especially altcoins. And then in 2013, some people from Ethereum basically told me, hey, come to the Crypto Valley in Zug because we're setting up this self-regulating organization. And at the time, as you can think, it's really very difficult to set up a new crypto startup because it's impossible to get a bank to work with you. There was so much uncertainty around the regulatory and legal side. And back then, there wasn't really the sexiness as there is today. So it was really this more niche market. So there was a big challenges. And so it made a ton of sense for me to go to Zug in Switzerland to try and solve those problems. But in the end, that didn't turn out to be the case because the Crypto Valley turned into this sort of ICO mecca in Zug. And Ethereum obviously did phenomenal in that regard. But that startup sort of failed, the crypto exchange. And then in 2015, I knew David and Sergey Ivanchelo quite well. And so then IOTA was born. And I've been focused on it 24/7 ever since, basically.
And for IOTA, most of the projects that we speak to, they're blockchain products, but IOTA isn't exactly blockchain. It's actually more of a Tangle. Do you want to explain to our viewers a little bit about what that means?
Yeah. So already back then, we realized that blockchain itself, it has its limitations. And the biggest limitations really has to do with scalability, the fee market, which is quite unreliable, especially when there's a lot of throughput coming through. And when it comes to miners, wasting a lot of electricity just to try to keep the chain secure. And we were really the first project that came to this space and said, hey, why don't we try to reinvent the distributed ledger? Why don't we utilize this DAG structure, so a directed acyclic graph, instead of the traditional blockchain? And the way that you can think about these two technologies is that a blockchain, you have this singular chain, block after block after block, where the miners are doing the consensus in the network and they're securing the blocks. Right? Now in IOTA, we are saying we remove the blocks, we remove the chain, and we remove the miners. So that means that you now, as a network participant, as a user, you're also directly contributing towards the security and the consensus of the system by validating two transactions in the history. Right? And through that, the graph grows and transactions basically become validated and become secure. And we introduced the Tangle in 2015. And we've been really focused on making sure that the Tangle as this radical new DLT concept is actually becoming production ready. And now in 2020, we have a very exciting future ahead of us because we are removing some of those major bottlenecks that the Tangle had during the early days, like the coordinator, like some of the technical implementations that we've had, and really make something that is going to be production ready and that can be utilized in the real world. And so over the next 12 to 24 months, we'll really start seeing this radical shift in terms of the utility of IOTA.
And like you mentioned, with IOTA, you're taking out the miners, and every user themselves is the one that are validating the transactions 2 to 1. So while other blockchains have trouble scaling the more users it gets, does IOTA actually get faster the more users it has?
So that's really one of the goals there, because fundamentally what we are saying is if there's low throughput, the confirmation times are also slower, right? But if there's more transactions coming through, the network will get faster. Obviously, there's some congestion control that needs to be put into place, because at the end of the day, every kind of DLT has a scalability limit unless you put in sharding. And this is really where we are thinking we are going, or like this is really what our roadmap looks like, which is to make sure that the current version of IOTA is as scalable, as decentralized, and as secure as possible, so that we have this clear path towards sharding then in the next phase, where exactly like you said, the network will have this unlimited throughput, and it will really be like this dynamic scaling and sharding network.
Yeah, I mean, that would be incredible, you know, because like you mentioned, as we see with the success of DeFi on Ethereum and the network congestion where there are crazy high fees, you know, gas fees for transactions, but IOTA doesn't even have that, right? You have smart contracts without fees?
Yeah. So like one of the big questions that we have to ask ourselves, is DeFi really a success for Ethereum? Because yes, it definitely brought a lot of attention to its network. But the biggest problem that Ethereum has today is that if there is one successful smart contract, like for example, Uniswap or even Tether, which is also running a smart contract, they're really congesting the entire network, right? So the entire pipe is eaten up by 80% of applications. And those 80%, which are maybe like one or two applications, they are really harming the entire network of all the other applications, right? They have more transaction costs, they have increased transaction times, and they really have an unreliable business model. And as such, the success of an Ethereum application is really harming the entire platform. And I think what we need to ask ourselves is really, is that the optimal kind of economics and incentives that a smart contract system should have? And we are going into the market saying, hey, we have the base layer of IOTA, and the base layer of IOTA is focused on just doing one thing, which is transactional settlement for free. And this is what we're doing right now with Chrysalis, where we're improving the base layer, we're doing a full protocol upgrade. And this is what we're doing with Coordicide by making the network completely 100% decentralized, or the most decentralized distributed ledger out there today that is also feeless. And now on top of that, as a secondary solution, we have now built smart contracts. And these smart contracts work very differently than Ethereum, where there's no longer this big monolith as in Ethereum, where everything gets into one state machine, but instead each contract will have its own state machine running on top of the Tangle. So the an individual smart contract can benefit from the security and the transaction speed and value transfer from the IOTA base layer, but it maintains its own state machine, which means that even if another smart contract is much more successful than yours, it will not have any impact on yours. And the way that those smart contracts work right now is that they are basically feeless, but you can also determine if you want to charge fees. But the big vision behind this is definitely that we can start building out a very exciting ecosystem around smart contracts in IOTA. And I think for next year, for this year, our biggest objective is really making sure that the base layer with Chrysalis is coming through, so that we'll be a much better Ripple, much better Litecoin in terms of transaction validation, and obviously in terms of cost and speed. And then next year we have a big focus on smart contracts and sort of this extension of the core in IOTA. So I'm very excited about that.
And as you mentioned, with a smart contract layer for IOTA, does the consensus in the transactions, is that similar to the base layer where every user will compute verify two transactions for every transaction they do also on the smart contract?
You can think about it like running a blockchain on top of IOTA, right? So it's no longer based on the same principles where you have the consensus as in IOTA, right? But it will have its own kind of consensus mechanism. And fundamentally, what this consensus is there to do is to maintain this state machine and these state transitions, right? And so these state transitions are really like a chain that are embedded into this graph in IOTA. So each smart contract will be its own chain within the IOTA Tangle, and the consensus within the smart contract, which might be like a committee, right? A committee of 9 nodes, of 108 nodes, or whatever, and they're maintaining the state of that smart contract. And because of that, it's much more scalable.
And what's their economic incentive to maintain that smart contract if there are no fees?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. So there's different perspectives of this. First of all, we can talk about the permissioned environment, like in a Hyperledger Fabric type of situation where we have a bunch of large companies that come together and say, hey, we're going to create a consortium. We're securing each other via contractual obligations, or because we trust each other, like a big company with their suppliers. And each of us maintains a node in this committee and makes the entire chain secure. And through that, everything is being automated. So with this in mind, IOTA can really start building out some of these very prominent Hyperledger use cases, which is very exciting, right? Relying on the security of the permissionless ledger, but having the freedom of a permissioned environment. Mm-hmm. Now, the second option here is really where you also start introducing transaction fees, or rather, we could call them execution fees. So there you can really provide an incentive to the committee members and say like, hey, for every execution, you get a small fee for your work. But the beautiful thing is that we give this freedom to people to decide which kind of route they want to take. Mm-hmm. And what's also very important is that we are really becoming more agnostic to the virtual machine environment. So you could really run the Ethereum virtual machine on top. We are already working with WebAssembly. And so it really becomes, you can think of it almost as a marketplace for smart contract execution, which is built on IOTA. Yeah. Very
cool. So right now, if there's a very popular Ethereum DeFi project or app right now, and once IOTA is ready for this, they could actually just run it on that IOTA second layer.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think interoperability and this composability will be very important for our smart contracts, and how IOTA can also be interoperable with other smart contract platforms.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that really got me excited when I first looked into IOTA and I read the white paper, I think at this point 2 years ago, what was this? It's in the name, IOTA, Internet of Things, IoT. Yeah. And it seems more and more as time progresses that the IoT is seemingly the future, and all devices will be interconnected. But how far away are we from that? And is that still the focus of IOTA?
So first of all, it's absolutely the focus, and now than ever we are much closer to realizing this vision of this machine economy. Because we really have received a lot of feedback from the industry and from the users of IOTA over the last couple of years. And now we are implementing those changes in the core protocol. And that is really fundamental to our adoption. And we are doing that with Chrysalis, and we're doing that with Corticide, and we're doing that with the sort of building blocks that we have on top of IOTA, like identity for machines and for humans, and access control for embedded devices, streams, secure data, streams, and obviously with smart contracts. Now, in terms of how far away it is, I think especially right now and with the progress that we are making with the core protocol is that we'll see a lot more adoption happening over the next few months. Like I would say 1 or 2 year time frame for the real first products to be launched. And that is really our big goal with the big partners that we have on board, to make sure that IOTA is really being thought of as a very essential component of every IoT infrastructure out there. And that is why we always compare IOTA really to a digital infrastructure layer that is augmenting the physical infrastructure. And physical infrastructure could be like a parking spot that now in the future utilizes IOTA smart contracts and IOTA access, so that you immediately, as soon as you park, the payment goes from the car to the parking station, right? These are the type of use cases that we envision for the future. And this is how we solve the problems with IOTA as this digital infrastructure layer. So I think now than ever, we're much closer to realizing that vision.
And when we're talking about, like you mentioned, the digital infrastructure, where you're taking, there's physical representations of the world and kind of putting it onto a distributed ledger and digitizing it. That's with blockchain. That's the role of an oracle. That's in charge of inputting data from off the chain onto the chain and verifying and making sure that it's correct, because it's one of the limits of a blockchain is actually getting that data in. How does IOTA solve that problem? How do you guys actually, let's say, I have a smartwatch, whatever's connected. How do you make sure that the data, how do you get the data from that device then onto the IOTA Tangle?
Like fundamentally, the problem is the same for all distributed ledgers. Like we don't inherently solve that with the protocol, but we can solve that with some of the applications that and with some of the partnerships that we have. Because at the end of the day, it's this garbage in, garbage out principle.
Yeah.
And what we do with IOTA, like one of the most recent examples was the IOTA access release. So this conditional access control for embedded devices. And the main assumption there is that it actually gets integrated into the hardware itself to have this hardware enforcement. And so because we're saying there's this symbiotic relationship between IoT hardware and DLT technologies like IOTA, because IOTA needs the IoT hardware to make sure that the data from the source can be trusted, that it's authenticated, and that it has not been tampered with. Right. And IoT needs DLT for the data integrity and for digital identities and stuff like that. So I think at the end of the day, the way that we solve this problem is really to merge IoT with IOTA much closer, so that hey, this is trusted hardware that I can rely on because of its hardware specifications, because of the way that the software runs on top of it, and because of the digital identity that is associated with it. And all of these combined really bring you this trust into the system itself.
And you mentioned you guys have partnerships, and this requires the partnerships of these hardware manufacturers if you do want to integrate it on the hardware level. When you go and you speak to them, are they there yet? Are these hardware manufacturers understanding the potential for DLT technology in integration like this?
Yeah, absolutely. Like one of the most exciting partnerships that we have is with ST Microelectronics. And they're really a great collaborator because they understand IOTA and they are building stuff themselves. Like, for example, they have an IOTA wallet integrated into the hardware as a module. So you can easily download it and play around with the IOTA network. And the same with IOTA Access, because IOTA Access needs hardware like ST hardware. And ST is really embedded into the car world. So it's like a perfect collaboration in that regard. I think in general, many hardware manufacturers are also realizing that DLT helps them to sell hardware better and faster. Because if you can say it's IOTA enabled or it's DLT enabled, it probably has much higher value proposition in a couple of years to your clients. And so now is the time where you actually need to invest into the kind of middleware stack that you want to build to offer IOTA and to offer other DLTs as well.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, helping to sell, especially when you're saying IOTA enabled, one of the big, let's say, I would say positives or pros about using a Tangle like IOTA versus a traditional, let's say, proof of work blockchain is the energy consumption. Like, once you take out the miners, the Bitcoin mining network requires a tremendous amount of energy and electricity. And of course, there are arguments to be made that it's economically viable only when they use alternative energy and it creates value. But regardless, IOTA, even at scale, would be using a much less energy than a traditional blockchain, correct?
Yeah, I mean, that is fundamentally our objective, to make sure that we are the most green technology out there and this trust layer that the physical infrastructure can rely on. And look, it's 2020, climate change is serious, and we need to be serious about how we can fight it. And consuming excess amounts of electricity just doesn't solve anything. It just adds to the problems, and we need to be realistic about this. And that is why we have so many different technologies than Bitcoin out there, because everybody is arguing, hey, Bitcoin is great. It was a start, but we need to make sure that we develop technologies that really fit the current kind of climate in terms of business needs, in terms of climate change, and in terms of the other problems that we are facing. And that is exactly why IOTA is trying to fill this gap in the market by saying, hey, we are not based on a blockchain, we are not wasting electricity, we don't have transaction fees, and we are really modular in terms of what our stack looks like to really meet these demands of the industry and also meet the demands of citizens that want to use our digital identities and so on and so forth.
And you guys aren't just saying this, you guys are actually putting this in practice. Can you tell me a little bit about the IOTA Energy Marketplace?
Yeah, so as one of the objectives of our organization is to really work closely with the industry, and we are also doing a lot of grants that are funded by certain governments like the European Commission or or we're also getting a grant in Japan or in other jurisdictions. And one of the biggest projects that we've gotten to date or that we've participated in to date was the City Exchange program, where we're working with, I think, 11 cities and around 30 corporate partners to work on these energy marketplaces. Because if you think about it, energy marketplaces are really the future. If you have excess amount of electricity, why can't I sell this to somebody that needs the electricity? Mm-hmm. But the regulation and the technology behind it is hugely complicated. And that is why this City Exchange project also came together. And over the next few years, the goal is really to have a functioning product that can be utilized in the real world. And the project already got a few really good recognitions for its work. And I definitely think, especially with the improvements that we are introducing to the base ledger in IOTA ledger, that we will really better understand how we can play a big role in there. But I think the energy markets, because they're so complicated, they're definitely 5 to 10 years away. I think where we can really add the most input is in mobility and especially in supply chain, where we also have some really exciting partnerships in terms of transparency, chain of custody, knowing where your good is, who transported it, and really adding more trust to supply chain in general.
And I think that with this energy marketplace, that really fits in line with what you said your goal was to really become a greener solution and really help the energy waste in the world. Because even right now, in terms of alternative energy generation, the technology is there to make all the energy we need. It's more an issue of utilizing the energy, whether storing it during if it's nighttime and the solar energy isn't there, how do we store the excess energy during the daytime? Or like you mentioned, how do we, if I'm manufacturing or making extra energy, how do I find that where it's needed and able to sell it? So I do think that DLT technology, and especially solutions like yours, could do tremendous benefit totally. For the state of our world. And the best part is, even if you don't believe in the green initiative, it's economically viable. And at the end of the day, that's what creates change, is saying, hey, you'll make money off this, and you'll see everyone will follow. You don't have to convince anyone. And so the question comes where if you're looking at this Tangle technology and it's greener, it scales better, it's just as secure. Why aren't more projects? Why aren't more people utilizing and building upon Tangle tech as opposed to an energy intensive and tough to scale technology like blockchain?
Well, first of all, I would argue that we are definitely one of the largest ecosystems out there, definitely in the top 5 in terms of corporate adoption, and also in terms of the community that we have. One of the biggest things that really differentiates us is that since the very inception of IOTA, we've always said we don't want to play this speculation game and really stay focused on creating value, even though that might have held us back in some regard. But fundamentally, what we are here to do is to create value to society, right? We're not here to make a bunch of nerds rich like with other cryptocurrencies. And I think the market many times is way too short-sighted, where people are just too focused on making these quick gains over a short period of time. People are too sold on, hey, crypto is here to make you money, but that is not why all of us got into the space, at least in the early days. It was all about creating some fundamental change and even radical changes. And one thing that I'm very proud of is that even after all of those years, we are still kind of focused on that fundamental vision that we set out in the beginning, and that we haven't lost sight of it. And while others might have a higher ranking in the market caps or whatever, we're still focused on delivering value, right? And we are bigger than ever. We have 110 people in the foundation who are really doing an excellent job. We have a really great number of large corporate partners that are building actual products with our technology. So I'm really not worried about short-term issues or short-term gains of others, because for us, this is really a long-term game, and we're not going to be here for the next 5 years. We're going to be here for the next few decades, right? And I think we'll always stay true to that vision and mission that we set forth.
And you did mention that you really see, while the true Internet of Things, of truly connected world is still a ways off. You did mention supply chain, and mobility. And I think mobility is really, we're right there. I mean, Tesla just started releasing for the first couple of customers, their quote unquote full autonomous driving. But that's clearly in the near future, the idea of autonomous fleets, taxis, personal cars, trucking, things of that nature. Do you think that, IOTA taking off will go hand in hand with let's say the adoption and the explosion of that kind of autonomous technology as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't just go hand in hand. It's really a necessity to achieve this vision of autonomy. Because you will not achieve full autonomy if your device is not able to pay other devices. Because the vision of autonomy is really that the machine becomes its own autonomous economic agent. It can start transferring value to other economic agents and really also send requests, basically saying, hey, I want to get the electricity, I want to get data, I want to offer my service in this marketplace. It's really the fundamental vision of this machine economy. And the only way that we can really have an autonomous truck or an autonomous car is by making it possible for this car to have a wallet. Because we don't want to envision a future where, like, for example, the Volkswagen car is being offered without the payment mechanism behind it, right? It cannot actually be able to participate in this fleet. It cannot earn money in that regard. And the way that the IoT is structured is that we're not going to think about the machine having a bank account and making an API call to that bank account and say, like, please transfer money to this other machine. That just doesn't work. We really need to think more on the machine level, on the embedded level, how we can enable these machine-to-machine transactions. So yeah, it's really a necessity to achieve autonomy.
Well, you did bring up one of the big, concerns, but criticisms of why can't you just, have the same way that I have Apple Pay on my phone and an Apple Card and an Apple Pay on my smartwatch. Why can't I have Apple Pay on my car as well? What is inherent to DLT technology that makes it better than, let's say, Apple Pay or Venmo or anything else?
Yeah, so I would say there's a couple of reasons. The first and most important reason is that basically what we have today is a bunch of large ecosystems that are dominated by a single player. And the single player has so much power over the ecosystem that they can decide on who can participate and who cannot participate, and also what kind of fees have to be paid to this owner of the ecosystem in order to maintain it. Like Uber owns the sharing fleet that they have, right? So a driver in the Uber ecosystem has absolutely no power to decide. And if Uber decides to increase their fees by 20%, like they have to accept it. Same with Google, same with Facebook, same with Apple and all of those large tech companies. And we have to ask ourselves, is that really a trustworthy future that we want to go towards? Do we want to be dominated by this Apple corporation that knows everything that we do on our phone, that knows every financial transactions that we do? And worst of all, we don't even know how that type of data will be misused. And one of the biggest visions behind DLT is that you own your assets and you own your keys, data. You can make your ultimate decisions. What happens with that? And especially for something as important as this future autonomous, for this autonomous future, we need to have trust into the system. And it cannot be a single party or even a consortium of parties owning that ecosystem, but it should really be something similarly to the internet, where initially it was really open, anybody could access it, and there was nobody dominating it. And the same is true with DLT, right? We need to make sure that it always remains this open permissionless network, where there's no single state actor, no big corporation that actually owns the protocol and can make these important decisions on it. And that is really very important for IoT, right? Because IoT is this autonomous future. If you think about it like this, right? What is the worst that happened during the internet days? Like the worst thing that happened is that you lost your data. And that is a really terrible thing, because now a malicious actor can utilize that data, do identity theft, even purchase goods in your name, and so on and so forth. But what is the worst thing that can really happen in this autonomous future is people dying. because a piece of mission critical infrastructure goes offline. The car goes the wrong direction because it got the wrong data sets or because it was intruded. And so we need to make sure that this trust layer that is making the entire infrastructure autonomous is open, is free, and is absolutely secure.
Mm-hmm. Well, you just raised the stakes. I've spoken to many projects. I did not know this was life and death here. You've raised the stakes on.
No, but it's a serious question, right? We're already talking about that algorithms are racist and that they're biased. And now think about how fundamental that is in terms of cars, right? Mm-hmm. You're trying to make it autonomous, but the data sets that you get have a big impact on how the car is being trained and how it's learning. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if you send a command from one device to another device and there was like a hacker in between, the entire infrastructure could fall apart. And we're already seeing this today where hackers are able to hack the energy grid and so on. Yeah. So it's a pretty grim future, but that's what we are here for, right?
It's scary, but it's also really optimistic. It's very powerful, and that power can go either way, and it's exciting as well. But that scary narrative is fitting because this is our Halloween conference, and so my question to you is, what is the scariest crypto or DLT story that happened to you?
Losing my keys. My private keys, right? Like it was like 2014 or so, and there was like, fuck, I forgot my private key, right? And like I couldn't access it anymore. And so basically it took me 2 weeks. I had to take a couple of hikes into the mountains. I was trying to constantly think, like, a year ago, how was I thinking when I made that private key? Like how could I like crack it myself and so on and so forth. And I just went into like 2 weeks trying back and forth, trying all kinds of combinations. And in the end, I was able to access it.
No way.
But that would have hurt a lot. Yeah.
Wow. But you were able to remember the seed words? How were you able to recover it?
Some brain exercise, let's put it that way.
Wow, yeah. That's incredible. Well, this goes to show you, sometimes you just need going to the mountains, some peace and quiet can go a long way.
Totally.
Wow, that is risky. I bet you keep it in a safer place these days, yeah?
Yeah, of course. Like back then it was like magical internet money, to be honest, right? Yeah. Nobody really took it that serious. But in the end, it worked out, so it's all fine. But it just shows you that it's so important to make sure that you have a lot of power, hold your keys safely, and make sure that you don't forget them. Right?
Well, I agree with you. Not your keys, not your crypto, and that's why I was a little unoptimistic or unexcited about that announcement by PayPal. Everyone lost their shit. Yeah. PayPal is accepting the buying and selling of crypto, but if you look into it, you can't hold your keys. You can't take it off platform. It's not crypto. They're exchanging it they're converting it to fiat before the merchant even gets it. So do you feel the same way? Or is that crazy news that PayPal accepting crypto, or is it just, more better for branding?
Like, first of all, I think it's very exciting for us because we have the problem with every kind of centralized exchange, Coinbase, Binance, and so on. So PayPal doing it is just a lot better, and they probably have a really good infrastructure provider that is keeping it all secure. So that's good. But it's a really hard question that we need to think about more, because every kind of decentralized system always has this tendency to go towards a centralized system because of convenience reasons, because of security reasons, but also because of market dominance reasons, right? Mm-hmm. And now with crypto, we have the same thing where everybody is going towards Coinbase, towards those centralized exchanges. And it is a big systemic risk for the entire space. And I don't have a solution yet. Like we could think about decentralized exchanges, and they are great, but we want to onboard millions of users, and are those millions of users going to go through these 5 to 10 different steps just to get their crypto in and out, right? It's a big convenience problem, and I think the entire space needs to invest a lot more resources into thinking about how can we solve this convenience problem, but also making sure that the vision and really what this ethos of blockchain that it still stays true, right? Because it doesn't make any sense to have a blockchain powered decentralized application if the company is centralized and owns the keys. right? So you could just use a database in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tough problem, but I think we'll get to solve it.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll solve it. The problem is we're an industry full of developers and codes who get impressed with TPS and we're focused on the functionality in the back end. The front end has always been an issue for the space, but I'm glad to know that there are teams like yours who have good values. Like you said, you're not in it for the speculation game. You have good principles where you're trying to be green and not to say that using energy is a bad thing, but you're trying not to waste energy, which is always a good thing. And so while the future is scary, it is also good to know that there is good projects like IOTA out there that are working toward a brighter future. So Dominik, I really appreciate you taking the time here to speak to us and to give our viewers a little bit on what's going on behind the scenes. And for all of our viewers here at Reimagine 2020, I'm Yonah Hochhauser. Thanks for watching.